The glittering, high-stakes world of corporate finance, loyalty is an illusion. It is a fairy tale told by billionaires to keep the working class obedient. For Elena Rostova, a senior financial analyst at Vance Enterprises, this illusion was her entire reality. She was 28 years old, brilliant, and completely consumed by her job. Elena didn't just work hard, she sacrificed her entire existence for the company. There were no weekends, no holidays, no personal life. There was only the glow of multiple monitors in a dark, empty office at 3 in the morning, crunching numbers, predicting market crashes, and making her CEO, Victoria Vance, richer beyond imagination. Victoria Vance was a legend in the city, but behind closed doors, she was a nightmare. She was a ruthless, cold-blooded manipulator who wore designer suits like armor and treated her employees like disposable chess pieces. She built her billion-dollar empire by stealing ideas, crushing competitors, and taking the credit for the exhausting labor of people like Elena. For 3 years, Elena accepted the toxic environment, believing that one day her relentless dedication would be rewarded. She believed in the system, but the system was rigged. It started on a Tuesday evening in late November. The sky outside the towering glass windows was dark, and a heavy, violent rain lashed against the building. Elena was packing up her briefcase, her eyes red, and exhausted from a brutal 60-hour shift when her phone buzzed. It was an urgent summons to the executive penthouse. When Elena walked into the massive, dimly lit office, the atmosphere was suffocating. Victoria was sitting behind her imposing marble desk, swirling a glass of expensive bourbon. Standing next to her were 2 men in dark suits from the internal audit department. "Close the door, Elena," Victoria said, her voice completely devoid of emotion. Elena's heart began to race. "What's going on, Victoria? Did the Asian market projections fail?" Victoria placed her glass down with a sharp clink. "No. This is about the sudden disappearance of $2.5 million from our primary investment fund. An anonymous tip led our auditors to a series of dummy accounts registered in the Cayman Islands. Accounts that were accessed, authorized, and finalized using your personal security clearance." Elena froze, the air left her lungs. "What? That's impossible. I never authorized any offshore transfers. The only international wires I handled this month were the ones you personally handed to me on that encrypted flash drive." Victoria's lips curled into a wicked, patronizing smile. "I have no idea what you're talking about. The digital footprint points entirely to you. You got greedy, Elena. It happens to the best of us in this job. The board of directors is furious, and they want blood. So here is how this is going to work. You are fired, effective immediately. Security is waiting outside to escort you off the premises. If you go quietly, I won't press federal charges. If you try to drag my name into this, I will bury you so deep in legal debt that your grandchildren will be paying it off." Panic and rage exploded inside Elena. She realized the horrifying truth in an instant. Victoria had been quietly embezzling company funds to cover her own bad personal investments, and she had deliberately used Elena's login credentials to do it. Elena was the perfect scapegoat. "You set me up," Elena whispered, her voice shaking with a mix of fear and sheer anger. "I gave my life to this job. I built the algorithms that saved this company from bankruptcy last year, and I own them," Victoria snapped back, her eyes flashing with malice. "You are nothing but a disposable cog in my machine. Now get out of my building before I have you thrown out." 10 minutes later, Elena was standing on the wet, freezing pavement outside the skyscraper, holding a small cardboard box of her belongings. Security had watched her pack. Her access card was deactivated. Her reputation was instantly destroyed. Over the next few weeks, the nightmare only grew worse. Victoria made sure that Elena was blacklisted from every major financial institution in the country. Whenever Elena applied for a new job, the interviews would go perfectly until they made a background call to Vance Enterprises. Then, the doors slammed shut. Months passed. Elena's savings were drying up. She was sitting in her small, cramped apartment, staring at a mountain of past-due bills. The depression was heavy, threatening to pull her under. But as she stared at the rejection letter from yet another entry-level job, something inside her snapped. The despair evaporated, replaced by a cold, burning, calculated fury. Victoria thought she had destroyed a weak, defenseless analyst, but she had actually forged a weapon. Elena knew the inner workings of Vance Enterprises better than anyone alive. She knew where the bodies were buried. She knew the secret tax loopholes, the illegal shell companies, and the fragile supply chains that held Victoria's empire together. Elena didn't just want a job anymore. She wanted revenge, total, absolute destruction. The first step of her master plan required a new battlefield. Elena spent weeks researching Apex Dynamics. They were Victoria's fiercest corporate rival, a massive firm that had been losing the market war to Vance Enterprises for years. Apex was desperate. Elena altered her resume, hiding her financial background, and applied for a low-level, invisible data entry job at Apex Dynamics. Because the role was so insignificant, they didn't bother running a high-level background check. She got in. For the first 2 months, Elena played the part of a quiet, unremarkable employee. But secretly, she was using Apex's internal servers to run massive, complex predictive models against Vance Enterprises. She was mapping out Victoria's entire financial ecosystem. When the time was right, Elena bypassed her immediate supervisors and walked straight into the office of the Apex CEO, Marcus Thorne. She handed him a thick, red folder. "What is this?" Marcus asked, annoyed by the intrusion of a data entry clerk. "That is a step-by-step blueprint of how Vance Enterprises is faking their third-quarter growth," Elena said, her voice filled with quiet confidence. "Victoria Vance is over-leveraging her assets to look invincible, but she is vulnerable. If you attack their supply chain in Europe and simultaneously short their stock, you won't just beat her. You will bankrupt her. Give me a real job, make me your lead strategist, and I will deliver her empire to you on a silver platter." Marcus read through the documents. His annoyance turned into absolute shock, and then into a predatory smile. Elena was promoted the next day. She was given a massive budget, a team of analysts, and a secure war room. The hunt had begun, but to completely destroy Victoria, Elena needed something from the inside. She needed hard, undeniable proof of the embezzlement. For this, she reached out to the only person she still trusted at her old job, Sarah. Sarah was an executive assistant who had suffered under Victoria's psychological abuse for years. When Elena secretly met Sarah in a dark, underground coffee shop, the proposition was simple: help me tear her down, and I guarantee you a corner office at Apex. Sarah agreed. Thus began a terrifying game of high-stakes corporate espionage. Sarah became Elena's eyes and ears inside the beast. Every day was a heart-pounding risk. Sarah would wait until Victoria went into board meetings. Then she would quickly insert a tiny, encrypted USB drive into Victoria's personal computer, downloading fragments of deleted server logs and hidden offshore bank statements. One afternoon, the tension nearly reached a breaking point. Sarah was in Victoria's empty office, downloading the final piece of the puzzle, the actual IP logs proving Victoria made the illegal transfers. The progress bar on the screen was agonizingly slow. 80%, 85%. Suddenly, Sarah heard the sharp, distinct clicking of Victoria's heels echoing down the marble hallway. Victoria's meeting had ended early. Sarah's heart hammered in her throat. 95%. The doorknob began to turn. 100%. Sarah snatched the USB drive, shoved it into her shoe, and immediately dropped to the floor, pretending to search for a dropped pen just as Victoria walked in. "What are you doing in my office?" Victoria demanded, her eyes narrowing with suspicion. I dropped your favorite fountain pen while bringing in the afternoon mail, Ms. Vance." "I just found it," Sarah lied flawlessly, placing the pen on the desk. Victoria sneered, dismissing her with a wave of her hand. Sarah walked out, her whole body shaking, but she had the data. When Elena finally received the decrypted drive, she had everything. It was a loaded gun pointed directly at Victoria's head. But Elena was a strategist. She knew that timing was everything. She didn't want to just expose Victoria. She wanted to do it when it would cause the maximum amount of financial carnage. The opportunity arrived 3 weeks later. Victoria Vance was on the verge of closing the Titan merger, a historic multi-billion-dollar acquisition that would make her the most powerful CEO in the hemisphere. The deal was set to be signed in a highly publicized press conference at exactly noon on a Friday. Victoria had invited every major financial news network to broadcast her triumph live. At 11:30 a.m., half an hour before the signing, Elena gave the green light. From her war room at Apex, Elena initiated a massive, coordinated strike. First, she anonymously forwarded the encrypted USB data, along with a detailed explanatory dossier, to the highest-ranking investigators at the Securities and Exchange Commission, the FBI, and the top financial journalists at the Wall Street Journal. Second, Marcus Thorne and the Apex team simultaneously dumped millions of Vance Enterprise shares into the market, triggering an artificial panic. At 11:45 a.m., the news broke. It didn't just break, it exploded like a financial nuclear bomb. Every news network simultaneously flashed the breaking headline: Massive embezzlement and fraud uncovered at Vance Enterprises. CEO Victoria Vance implicated in multi-million-dollar offshore scandal. Inside the Vance Enterprises boardroom, Victoria was posing for the cameras, holding a gold-plated pen to sign the Titan merger. Suddenly, the phones of every single person in the room began buzzing uncontrollably. The CEO of the Titan Group looked at his phone, his face draining of color. He stood up, looked at Victoria with utter disgust, and walked out of the room without a single word. The cameras kept rolling as total chaos erupted. Victoria rushed to the massive glass window looking down at the trading floor. It was absolute pandemonium. Brokers were screaming, phones were ringing off the hook, and the giant digital ticker showing the company's stock price was plummeting in real time. 10%, 20%, 40% down. Billions of dollars in valuation were being wiped out in minutes. "Shut it down!" Victoria screamed at her executives, her carefully maintained composure completely shattered. "Get the lawyers. Call the SEC, tell them it's a lie, find out who did this to my company." But there was no stopping the bleeding. By 3:00 p.m., Vance Enterprises was effectively bankrupt. Their credit lines were frozen by the federal government. The building was surrounded by news vans. Victoria sat in her dark office, her makeup ruined, her hands shaking. Her phone rang. It was an urgent call from the board of directors. They had received a hostile takeover bid. Apex Dynamics was offering to buy the smoldering remains of Vance Enterprises for pennies on the dollar. With the SEC threatening to seize all assets by midnight, the board had already voted to accept. Victoria was ordered to go to the Apex headquarters immediately to sign the surrender documents. It was raining again when Victoria's black car pulled up to the Apex Dynamics building. She walked into the massive boardroom, a broken, defeated shell of the tyrant she was just hours ago. The room was mostly empty, illuminated only by the city lights shining through the windows. Marcus Thorne wasn't there. Instead, a single figure was sitting in the high-backed leather chair at the head of the long mahogany table, facing the window. "Where is Marcus?" Victoria demanded, trying to summon whatever authority she had left. "I am here to sign the transition papers." The leather chair slowly spun around. Victoria stopped dead in her tracks. All the breath left her body. Her eyes widened in pure, unadulterated horror. Sitting there, wearing a perfectly tailored charcoal executive suit, with a calm, predatory smile on her face, was Elena. "Hello, Victoria," Elena said, her voice smooth and chillingly calm. "Elena," Victoria whispered, her mind unable to comprehend the reality in front of her. No, that's impossible. You're a nobody. You were blacklisted. You couldn't even get a job at a bank teller's window." Elena stood up and slowly walked toward her former boss. You taught me a very valuable lesson the night you fired me, Victoria. You taught me that loyalty is a weakness. You taught me that in this job, you have to be willing to destroy everything in your path to win. You framed me for your crimes because you thought I was too weak to fight back. Elena picked up the buyout contract and tossed it onto the table in front of Victoria. I didn't just find a new job, Elena whispered, leaning in close. I orchestrated this entire war. I found your hidden accounts. I sent the files to the FBI. I crashed your stock. I convinced Apex to buy your empire while it was burning. And as the new lead partner and major shareholder of this merged company, I own your algorithms. I own your patents. I own this building. I own everything that used to be yours. Victoria's legs gave out, and she sank into a chair, tears of absolute defeat streaming down her face. Please, she begged, her voice pathetic and small. I can help you run it. I know the international clients. Don't do this. Elena looked down at her with eyes as cold as ice. My first official act as the owner of this company is terminating your employment. Pack your things. Security is waiting outside to escort you off the premises. As Victoria was frog-marched out of the boardroom by two massive security guards, she looked out the glass doors. The flashing red and blue lights of FBI vehicles were reflecting off the wet pavement. Federal agents were waiting in the lobby with handcuffs. Victoria Vance wasn't just losing her job, she was going to federal prison for a very, very long time. Elena stood by the massive window, looking out over the glowing city skyline. The storm had finally passed. She had lost everything to a toxic job, but through patience, brilliance, and absolute ruthlessness, she had conquered the very empire that tried to destroy her. Sometimes, the most dangerous mistake a toxic boss can make is underestimating the quietest person in the room. Have you ever given your heart and soul to a job, only to realize your boss was taking all the credit, or worse, setting you up to fail? How did you deal with your toxic workplace? Let me know your craziest job stories in the comments section below. I read every single one of them. If you enjoyed this story of ultimate corporate revenge and want to hear more satisfying comebacks, please hit that like button, share this video with a friend who hates their boss, and make sure to subscribe to the channel so you never miss another story. I'll see you in the next one.